I was born and bred in Whitstable, and the Whitstable ley line is actually what you might call the thread that led me into this labyrinth, which is Gog Magog. An old lady that lived up the street told me that there was a dead giant laying in the forest. It stuck in my head for some reason. Many years later, I came to realise that Chestfield is actually a coffin field. Chest means coffin. And that what she was pointing at on the horizon was a field of chests known as Chestfield, because all along the skyline behind Whitstable are tumuli, massive tumuli, covered in forest now so you can't see them. And once I realised that these tumuli were there, I came to realise gradually that there was an alignment between this tumuli in the forest and the street of stones at Whitstable. And I then filled in the missing dots between that. 6 years later, I discovered that there's a great giant in the landscape. It was literally the elephant in the room, which I knew was there and yet didn't know was there. This figure is so large that you can't see it, that nobody sees it, that nobody has seen it for at least 500 years. His name is Gog Magog, and entire counties. That's Norwich, Suffolk, Essex, Hertfordshire, Kent. He's got his nose, his eyes, his ears, his hand, his feet, his genitals. I say he, it's actually a hermaphrodite figure. London is the belly of this giant in the landscape. The River Thames is its umbilical cord. Kent is the legs, which is why it's got the emblem of a horse standing up on two legs, because that's a perfect image of power. It's also the reason we're called the Weald of Kent, is because wield means to wield power, as Kent has always done.
So how do you understand this giant, its being?
Well, it's difficult to actually reach a really hard and fast conclusion on it. Even after studying this thing for 7 years, I still can't tell you if it's a natural formation or if it's a man-made formation. And a good question on that line is, is it an eye because you see it, or is it an eye because it sees you? So if the landscape's got an eye, we might not seriously take that question seriously, but the ancient people certainly would take that seriously, because they saw living things everywhere in random shapes. They saw, when they looked at the stars, they saw entities, angels, gods, serpents, swords, the astrological signs. Really the question you should ask is, what did the ancients think of it rather than what we might think of it? In their mind it was a living god. His name is Gog, and he does appear in the Bible as well. He's one of Noah's 7 grandsons. He also appears in the Revelation at the end of times as one of the nations involved in the battle against the armies of the Lord. Well, mostly by trying to hush up what was beneath our feet. They said, that's the devil down there, and if you continue your practices, your ancient practices of worshipping that figure down there in the landscape, we'll hang you and your children, we'll burn you, we'll burn your houses down, we'll kill you. So Christianity's role has mostly been in hushing it up. They played a terrible role. I mean, many people have died because they would not forget about this effigy in the landscape. And it was only a matter of time before the knowledge about it would come back. There was a place on the giant's spine called Stoke. Along came the Christians and renamed it, and they renamed it Stoke Mandeville. Stoke means spine. It also means offspring. And man-devil means only one thing, man-devil. In Genesis, one of Adam's main jobs was to name things, and that's because it's a very powerful and important thing. People that named the places, it was their religious duty. They believed in the beginning was the Word. If you've got something's word in your power, then you are powerful. You have power over the thing you've named. And they didn't just go around and name these places and then just walk away. They would sacrifice. They would sacrifice somebody or several somebodies to make it stick. I believe this effigy, this figure, is the origin of all religions. Of course, it's nothing to do with Christianity in that sense. Christianity's, so we're told, has come from the Middle East. But then there are stories that William Blake and did those feet in ancient times, walk upon England's mountains green, and was the Holy Lamb of God in England's pleasant mountains seen. Well, it turns out that the Holy Lamb of God is England. And his feet did walk because they still are walking. The Anglo-Saxon language is an indigenous language.
Where did you get this information?
Well, I didn't make it up on my own. There's well-respected archaeologists and historians who have studied the place names of Britain, and they've realised that less than 1% of the place names in England are Celtic. And the orthodox view is that the Celts were indigenous to England before the Romans came. But why isn't there any remnant at all of Celtic language in any of the place names? There is not a single remnant anywhere. 95%, I would say, of the place names are Anglo-Saxon. We speak Anglo-Saxon. There is very, very little genetic evidence to support the theory that the Anglo-Saxons invaded us after the Romans. There's hardly any evidence to support that. The evidence actually points to the Anglo-Saxons being more of a slave class rather than the masters of us. And so there's no explanation for how come this place name spread so rapidly and so thoroughly around the country, unless the theory that this language was here before the Romans. If that's accepted, it answers the question. I have to say, it wasn't until you actually drew my attention to the fact that I hadn't done a lot of research on the spine of the baby, of the baby giant, that I decided to have a look at a geological map of the country, and I saw within about 10 minutes that the spine is actually really, really there. It's a huge, ancient prehistoric trackway called the Ridgeway that runs up over the Chiltern Hills, and it is the baby's spine, and you can actually see it on a geological scan of the country. You can see that there is a high ridge of land called the Chiltern Hills, which actually means children's hills when you look at it in the ancient language. They used to ritually walk along his spine to his top of his head, where they did all kinds of rituals based on the solar and lunar calendar. Yeah, the crown of his head is actually where what we know as Seahenge, a ring of oaks. That's the crown of his head, which ties in with an old legend about King John, bad King John, the youngest brother of Richard the Lionheart, lost his crown in the wash, and his crown was a golden ring of oaks. So you've got this kind of coincidence of a famous king losing his crown in the wash, and then 500 or 600 years later, a ring of oaks comes up out of the wash. And I say that there's been some kind of confusion, either deliberately caused or just happened, that the ring of oaks is actually, Seahenge is King John's crown. And King John is Gog Magog. It's just another name for him. This discovery, I've written a book about it, which is about to be published. So I can't give too much away. It's just that I'm wanting to give people clues and hints about what I've discovered, so that they might go and have a look at my blog and have a look at my website. As if I'm talking to that man. And looking into that.